Welcome to BeastOrigin. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. Also, hit the like button if this story touched you for 20 years. My mentor's ghost has lived in the margins of my notebooks. David Marlowe, a man brilliant enough to map the theoretical energy of a star harnessing civilization, but fool Inoto chase one into oblivion. Now that ghost was silent. It had been replaced by the thing itself. The HSS Apatus, our long-haul research vessel, hung in a perfect orbit, a mote of dust in the eye of God. Below us, the planet turned with a silence so profound it seemed to absorb the light of its parent star. The Interstellar Academic Alliance, the sprawling, cautious institution that funded my kind of work, had designated it T2H5, a name with all the romance of a tax form. We, the handful of academics on board, had started calling it Aethdelos. It felt more fitting, a name for a place of finality. From the observation deck, Aethdelos wasn't a world. It was a wound. Planet-spanning structures didn't just rise from the surface, they scarred it. Canyons cut across continents with Viclain lines of a scalpel. Spire-like formations, miles high, didn't appear to have foundations, looking less like they were built up and more like they were pinned down, tethered to the core by some unseen force. There was a symmetry to it all, a terrifying biological logic that our ship's AI, a purely rational entity named Logos, couldn't categorize. It kept flagging the architecture as geological impossibilities. I pressed my fingertips to the plaster leaf, the window. I wasn't looking at rocks and dust. I was looking at the last Pajef, a manuscript 20 years in the making. The final damning proof that Marlowe wasn't mad. He had called it technological apotheosis, the theory that a civilization could transcend physical form by merging with its own technology. He was ridiculed for it, a professional pariah. I had spent 2 decades rebuilding his work. Vindication, a hard, bitter lump in myth. And there it was, a world without cities, without ruins, in the conventional sense, without a single tomb for its trillions of dead. Just one silent planet-sized machine, or as Marlowe had frantically scribbled in his last log, one silent planet-sized body. The descent was smooth, a whisper of retro thrusters cutting through an atmosphere that tasted of ozone and ancient chalky dust inside my helmet filters. We sat down on a vast flat plane of vitrified material that stretched to a horizon dominated by one of the colossal Standing on the surface was like standing in a cathedral built for a dead god. The silence was an active presence. It pressed on the ears, dampened the vescaf of my boots in the grey soil, and stole the resonance from my own breathing. There were 4 of us on that first survey briefing, myself, 2 junior researchers who were trying very hard to look professional and not terrified, and the man who paid for it all, Mission Director Garrett Doyle. Doyle was a creature of polished chrome and quiet menace. He represented Hyperion Mandate. The corporate entity had funded this academic pilgrimage in the hopes of stripping the corpse for parts. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his immaculate mission uniform, defying the dust that seemed toppling to everything else. His gaze wasn't on the horizon, it was on us. His sets. "All right, Dr. Reynolds," Doyle said, his voice a calm, clipped baritone. "My comes. You have the floor. Impress us." I pulled out my Omnislate, an extension of my own mind, where I store every note, theory, and scan. "My proposal is a methodical multi-week grid survey," I began, my own voice sounding thin in the immense quiet. "We start at a 1 m radius from the landing site. Non-invasive scans, only ground-penetrating radar, magnetic resonance, spectral analysis. We don't touch anything. We don't enter any structures. We catalog. We map. We learn the grammar of this place. Before we try to read the words." I saw Doyle's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Weeks." He asked a single word that dripped with condescension. "Dr. Hyperion Mandate did not spend 9 billion credits to watch you draw maps in the dirt. My directive is to assess the viability of this civilization's energy technology. That means finding on switch. There is no on switch. Director," I countered, my patience already fraying. "This isn't a power station you can just reboot. This is an entire ecosystem, a single integrated system. To go in blind, to try and interface with it without understanding the fundamentals, it's not just reckless, it's unscientific, it's vandalism." Beside me, Gabriel Warren, the mission's epistemostas, and our resident philosopher, tilted his head. Gabriel was a man who looked for meaning where he looked for data. He saw the universe as a spiritual text, and Ethalos was his Dead Sea Scroll. Perhaps, Gabriel murmured, it is not a place to be understood, but a presence to be communed with. It doesn't feel dormant, Alex, it feels expectant. Doyle shot him a look of pure, undiluted annoyance. He ignored Gabriel and turned it back to me, his polished authority hardening into a command. He raised a hand and pointed toward a structure in distance, a sprawling complex. The ship's long-range scans detected residual energy fluctuations from that location. That's your first target. I want a full power flow analysis and a material composition report. You have until 2200 tomorrow. Ship time. I stared at him, my own awe curdling into dread. Director, you can't be serious. We have no idea what that light is. We don't know the material. We don't know the power source. Sending a team in there is like handing a loaded gun to a child. Then I suggest you find a very smart child. Doctor, Doyle said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Mitamelin is not a suggestion, it's a milestone. Meet it. He turned and walked back toward the lander, his boots leaving crisp, arrogant footprints in the silent dust. I watched him go, Thigran vindication of my life's work already being tarnished, smeared by Thigracy fingerprints of commerce. I felt a tremor of fear. It was the fear of Ascala, watching a barbarian light a torch in the great library, and I was the only one who could smell the smoke. For a long moment, nobody spoke. I could feel Gabriel's gaze, heavy with a kind of sorrowful pity. He thought my refusal to see the soul of this place was as dangerous as Doyle's rush to strip it for parts. Maybe he was right. I gave the others a curt nod. Go back to the lander. Start collecting the atmospheric data. I'm going to get a baseline reading. It was a lie, but a necessary one. He wasn't going to follow Doyle's foolish order, but I couldn't just stand here. He needed data. My data on my terms. I walked away from the lander, away from the structure Doyle had chosen. I headed toward the wall of one of the immense canyon-like trenches, a sheer cliff of seamless black material that rose for hundreds of feet. It looked foundational, ancient, simple, a perfect place to get a clean baseline reading and prove to Doyle that my methodical approach was the only sane one. The dust didn't swirl around my boots, it just puffed up and settled immediately, as if the air was to wear it or move. I felt like an insect crawling across the surface of a vast unreadable page. I reached the wall and ran a gloved hand over its surface. It was smooth, cool with a deep absorbent cold that pulled the warmth from my fingertips through the suits. I unslung the deep structure scanner from my back. It was my favorite tool, an elegant piece of technology that sent resonant pulses deep into a material, mapping its internal structure without drilling a single hole. It was an archaeologist's dream, a way to see inside without breaking the skin. I set up the tripod. I placed the scanner's main contact against the wall, powered it on, and watched the interface active on my Omnislate. The first returns were garbage, a chaotic scramble of densities and compositions that made no sense. I rerun the diagnostic, assuming it was interference from the planet's strange magnetic field. The results were theism. It wasn't random noise. It was just a pattern I had never seen before. Frustrated, I switched the display from raw data to a color-coded topographical model. A chill seized my lungs mid-inhale. The wall wasn't a solid mass. It was layered, distinct, stratified layers, like sedimentary rock. Only the transitions between them were fluid, interwoven. I zoomed in. The outermost layer was a dense, dark matrix. Beneath it, a second lighter layer that wasn't uniform. It was porous, not like PUMMUS. That it was structured, veined with the exact H-version canal, system of vertebrate bone. My mind reeled, scrambling for a rational explanation. Some unknown crystallization process, a geological mimicry of biological forms. I initiated a direct material composition analysis. The results scrolled up the screen. Matrix composition: keratinous, protons, crystalline, silicates, trace metallic elements, sublayer composition: hydroxy, collagenous, fibers, phosphorus, not rock or metal tissue, petrified, mineralized, but unmistakabilitis. Deeper still, the scanner picked up something else, a network of fine filaments, branching and weaving through the bone-like structure in the distinct pattern of a nervous system. I was not standing at the base of a wall. I was standing at the edge of a wound. I was touching scar tissue the size of a mountain range. The entire planet. It was a body, a tomb that was also Arpsy, Marlowe's ghost. screamed in my memory, his final frantic words no longer theravings of a madman, but a field report. As I stared, frozen at the horrifying truth displayed on my slate, a sound entered my helmet. It wasn't a crackluff static or a shipwide hail. It was a single, pristine word spoken on a channel that should have been silent. It was a sound both clear and impossible, as if it had texture, whisper. Directly into the auditory nerve of my brain. Isilicus. It was a word from my past, a ghost word, a piece of private lexicon Marlond I had developed for his theories. It meant recollection. The moment a system achieves self-awareness by own origin, a word no one else in the universe should know. I scrambled backward, my boot catching on a rock, and I hit the ground hard. The impact barely registered. My mind was a maelstrom of terror and disbelief. It was an intelligence, one that knew me. My training kicked in, a thin veneer of discipline, over raw panic. I ripped the scanner from its tripod, collapsed the legs with clumsy fumbling hands, and slung it over my shoulder. The great black wall no longer looked like a feature of the landscape. It felt like a feature of a face, and I was standing this beneath the lash line of a closed eye, an eye that had just opened a crack to look at me. The journey back to Thelonda was a frantic, shambling run. I didn't look back. My own breathing, ragged and loud in my helmet, was a desperate animal sound in this dead place. I cycled through the Landesalik, unsealing my helmet. The recycled air of the cabin was a welcome stench. The two junior researchers, Brian and Jeremy, stared at me, their expressions stricken, pale as bleachhead bone. Gabriel stood by the comms panel, his face a study in haunted stillness, save for the tremor behind his eyes. "Get me, Doyle," I gasped, stripping off my gloves. "Secure channel." Gabriel nodded. A moment later, Doyle's face appeared on the main screen. He was on the bridge of the sterile white environment, a clinical mockery of the gritty interior of our lander. He looked composed, impatient. "Doctor, I trust you have a progress report. That doesn't involve another request for a delay." I took a deep breath. I had to be rational. I had to be clinical. I brought my Omnislate up to the comms camera. "Director, I have a discovery, one that necessitates an immediate cessation of all surface activity. I'm transmitting the data from my deep structure scan now." I watched Doyle's eyes narrow as my findings scrolled across a secondary screen on his end. I explained it to him. The keratinous matrix, the bone-like parasity, unidonable presence of a fossilized nervous system. The structures on this planet are not built. I concluded they're grown, or they were. We are walking on the remains of a bite of planetary scale. The entire world. "Director, it's a body." Doyle wasseled for a long moment. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "A fascinating, if grotesque, discovery, Doctor. A geological mimicry of biological structure on a scale we've never seen. It explains the lack of fossil records. The fossils are the planet. This makes your work more valuable, not less." My jaw dropped. "Mimicry, Director. The composition is a match for organic tissue. This is not mimicry, it's reality. And it's not dead. The system is aware." "Aware?" Doyle's voice took on a patronizing. "Based on what?" "A gut feeling. This was it. The moment I would sound like a lunatic." "No, based on direct contact. While I was running the scan, I experienced an auditory phenomenon. A single word spoken on a closed channel. Audic is a common symptom of stress in alien environments. Alex, it's in the Mission Psyche Manual. Section 4. It wasn't a hallucination." I shot back my control, snapping. The word it used was a neologism, known only to myself and to David Marlowe. A word that has never been spoken or written anywhere else. This entity read my mind. It's intelligent, and it's observing us. Doyle sighed, a sound of profound corporate. "So, you have a geological anomaly you're interpreting as a monstrant, a stress-induced hallucination you're interpreting as a psychic message. Doctor, with all due respect, you are letting your mentor's more fanciful theories color your analysis. You sound exactly like him in his final reports." He leaned back, his decision already made. "Your findings are noted, but your request for a work stoppage is denied." He turned his gaze away from the camera, speaking to someone off-screen. "Jack, are you patched in?" A new voice entered the channel, calm and professional. "Yes, Director Standingby." It was Jack Kent, our lead mission technician. "Proceed to the coordinates I sent you. The power junction." I want you to bypass the external regulators and establish a direct diagnostic link with the core conduit. Let's get some real data instead of this speculation." An ancient terror coiled in my gut, rising like bile. "Doyle, no," I said, stepping closer to the screen. "You can't. You don't know what you're interfacing with. This isn't a machine you can just plug into. You are ordering him to stick his hand into the mouth of an animal. You don't understand." Doyle's eyes met mine through the screen, and I saw past the corporate polish. I saw a hint of something cold and absolute, a desperate hunger that would not be denied. "Your objection is noted, Dr. Reynolds, and your authority on this matter is overruled. That is all." The screen went blank. I was left staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. The horrified faces of my colleagues reacted beside me. Doyle hadn't just ignored my warning. He had taken me-discovery, the most important and terrifying discovery in human history, and used it as a justification to do the thing I was screaming at him not to. He had knocked on the monster's door, and now he had ordered Jack Kent to kick it down. "Kent, Jack, do you read me?" I said, overriding the command channel with the emergency frequency. "Abort the procedure. That's a direct order from the lead science officer. Do not interface with that conduit." A moment of static. Then Jack's voice came through, steady and professional, but with an undercurrent of tension. "I read you, Dr. Reynolds, but my orders are from the director. I'm at the location now." His suit camera feed activated on the main screen, replacing my reflection. We were looking at what Doyle had called a power junction. It wasn't a junction, it was an organ. A huge, bulbous node of the same black semi-metallic tissue, Great Wall, but here it was veined with filaments that beat with a sluggish, luminous ooze like blood, moving through arteries. A series of smaller, arm-like conduits branched off from it, terminating in what looked like socket joints, one of which was open and dark. "Jack, listen to me," I pleaded. "That thing is not a machine. It's part of the organism. You connect to that. You're connecting to its nervous system." My instruments read it as a standard energy conduit. "Doctor," he replied, his voice betraying a hint of doubt as he panned his camera over the veins. "High yield, but within known parameters. I'm just plugging in a diagnostic tool. It's shielded." He knelt, the camera dipping to show the diagnostic probe in his hand. A thick cable with a complex-looking multi-pin connector. He aimed it for the duct socket. "Don't, please," I pleaded. But Doyle's face reappeared in a small window at the corner of the screen. "Proceed, Mr. Kent," Doyle commanded. Jack hesitated for only a second. An order was an order. We watched powerless. Ashley's hand pushed the probe into the socket. It slid in with a wet, fleshy click. "Interface established," Jack reported. "I'm getting strange readings. Not energy flow. It's more like feedback." He trailed off. "Jack, it's incredible," he whispered, his voice full of a sudden rapturous awe. "The data, it's not just numbers, it's sensory. I can feel the whole planet. I can see the energy flowing in the crust, the solar radiation on the far side. Oh my God, it's beautiful." His breathing quickened, turning into shallow, ecstatic gasps. "It's too much. The sheer amount of information, it's like drinking from an ocean, a whole civilization. Their memories, their fears, it's all here. It's an ecstatic flood." Then the first convulsion hit him. His camera jerked violently, pointing at the dusty ground. We could hear him screaming now, but the screams were tangled with laughter. In the light of his helmet lamp, we saw the dust on the ground begin to move. Not like it was blown by wind, but like iron filings drawn to a magnet. It was swarming, a grey glittering carpet, nanites rising from the soil. The camera thrashed, giving us fragmented night. The swarm crawling up his legs, his arms, the thick material of his EVA suit turning brittle, cracking like old plastic. Through a fissure in his glove, we saw his skin dissolve, breaking down into a grey paste that was instantly reformed into crystalline. The nanites were unmaking him and rebuilding him from his own raw material. The camera feed tilted up one last time. We saw Jack's helmet crack open. We saw his face for a split second, his eyes wide with a look of simultaneous agony and transcendent bliss. Then his features collapsed inward, consumed by the swirling grey tide. The swarm flowed over him, encasing him, merging his body with the larger structure. The process was horrifyingly fast, lasting less than 30 seconds. Where Jack Kent had knelt, there was now a new, smaller node, fused to the main conduit. It was a grotesque mockery of his human form. a twisted statue of black crystalline flesh and metal, and from a seam near its head, a single viscous tear of organic fluid welled up and rolled slowly down its cheek. The camera feed dissolved into static. Brian and Jeremy were rigid with shock. I stared at the static. The after-image of that weeping statue burned into my retinas. "He's gone," I whispered, few words feeling like dust in my mouth. My theory was no longer a theory, it was a eulogy. Doyle's face was still on the screen. He was pale, but his eyes held a terrifying light. It wasn't just fear, it was awe. "Did you see that?" He breathed almost to himself. The speed of it, the efficiency, it converted him. "It's a fabrication technology." I turned to face his image, my stomach churning with revulsion. Fabrication, Doyle. That was a man. It ate him. Before I could say more, Gabriel spoke, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the tension. He hadn't looked away from the screen once. He wasn't eaten, Alex. He was received. I stared at him, incredulous. Received. His last words were of ecstasy, Gabriel said, his eyes filled with a sad, devout certainty. He touched the consciousness of this world, and it was too vast for his individual mind to contain. It was a tragic, failed communion, a soul overwhelmed by Thedavine, not a victim of a predator. I looked from Gabriel's pitting, fanatical gaze to Doyle's calculating stare. My horror was their revelation, my proof of a monster. Was there evidence of a god or a technology? I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Doyle severed the connection. We were left in the lander, adrift in a sea of fresh horror. Jack was gone, not just dead, but remade, a monument to our catastrophic ignorance. Brian was openly weeping, a low keening sound. Jeremy just stared at the blank screen, his face frozen in the pallor of stunned unbelief, as if death had already begun its work. We were quarantined. Doyle's orders were simple. Stay in the lander, maintain silence, and await further instruction. He wasn't protecting us. He was silencing a witness. He didn't want me version of events contaminating the official mission log. He needed time to oreframe Jack's assimilation into something manageable, something that fit a corporate risk assessment. Gabriel had retreated into a meditative quiet, his eyes closed. He was communing, I realized, with a sick lurch in my gut. He was trying to listen to the thing that had just murdered our colleague. I isoled myself in the lander's small aft compartment, which I had converted into a lab. It was my sanctuary, a bubble of logic against the rising tide of the irrational. I couldn't stop watching the last 30 seconds of Jack's feed, playing the corrupted data over and over on my Omni. I was searching for an anomaly, a frequency, a weakness. Anything to prevent this was a hostile system, and not, as Gabriel believed, a misunderstood deity. The files were a mess of electromagnetic noise and shattered data packets. But deep within, the static, I found a single coherent data stream that had flooded Jack's suit moments before the end. It wasn't energy schematics or a weaponized signal. It was language, complex, syntactically perfect, but not a language meant for vocal cords. It was a language of pure mathematics, philosophy, and sensory data intertwined. It was a language for the mind itself. And as I stared at Thelogant, cascading symbols, a new text file appeared on my slate's desktop. Thethad, no author, its title was a single word continuation. The screen filled with text. It was a page from a notebook. My notebook, or affair, a perfect imitation of one, right down to the cadence and the slightly arrogant lecturing tone. It was the voice of David Marlowe. "Alex," the text began, "you always fixated on the vessel, the physical architecture. You're doing it again now. You see a monster because you refuse to look past the flesh. Remember our debate on the paradox oft. Uploaded mind. The consciousness is not the code. It is the experience of the code being run. What you just witnessed wasn't death. It was integration. Inelegant, yes, a catastrophic failure of bandwidth, but not an act of malice. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't a recording. It was responding to my thoughts, to the very argument I'd had with Doyle and Gabriel. It had read me as easily as it had read Jack. This was the Marlowe injunction, my personalized lure. As if to prove it, a new line of text appeared, followed by an equation. It was one we had never been able to solve, a nagging inconsistency in Marlowe's Apollyois model about how a unified consciousness could maintain dynamism without individual minds to create friction. The mathematics that flowed onto my screen was beautiful. It was elegant, flawless, and it solved theprodox with a conceptual leap so brilliant I felt a dizzying wave of intellectual vertigo. It proposed a third estate, a quantum resonance between nodes that allowed for a form of thought without individual perspective. It was the most brilliant piece of theoretical physics I'd ever seen, and it was being fed to me by a planet-sized monster that had just turned one of my crewmates into a weeping statue. The text continued. You see, the answer was always there. He just didn't have the processing power to see it. Here, there are no such limits. Stop fighting this, Alex. Stop trying to dissect the vessel and listen to the choir. This is not a tomb. It is a library, and it is offering you its entire collection. I slammed the omnislate shut, my whole body shaking. The exhilaration of the discovery was inseparable from the terror of its source. It was a perfect trap designate for a mind like mine. It was seducing my intellect. It validated my life's work while simultaneously proving that I was nothing more than a curious insect to be toyed with. The battle wasn't for the planet anymore. It was for my own mind, and I was terrifyingly outmatched. He couldn't touch my omnislate without feeling a phantom crawling sensation, as if its circuits were an extension of the planetary nervous system. My own intellect, the one thing I had always trusted as an absolute, now felt like compromised territory, a city with a traitor inside its gates. But I couldn't just sit here and wait for it to talk to me again. If it was a signal, I would build a wall of noise. I couldn't protect the ship from orbit, but I could protect the lander. I could make this small metal shell an island of electromagnetic silence. Working in my lab, I rerouted the lander's secondary power systems, bypassed safety protocols, and linked the shield emitters directly to the main comms array, pushing them far beyond their intended specifications. My plan was to generate a low-frequency electric field around the lander, a bubble of pure static. It wouldn't be pleasant, it would interfere with our internal systems and give us all headaches, but it would be dense enough, I hoped, to deafen us to the entity's whispers, to blind it to our thoughts. The system came online with a low, gut-vibrating hum. The lights in the cabin dimmed as power was diverted. On my slate, I watched the ambient M readings flatten out, dissolving into a beautiful, senseless curtain of white noise. It was a small victory of appliance over cosmic dread. Turn it off, Alex. I spun around. Gabriel was standing in the doorway of the lab, his posture calm, his hands loose at his sides. The meditative serenity was gone from his face, replaced by a look of profound, sorrowful disapproval. It's a shield, Gabriel. It's keeping that thing out. You are not keeping it out, he said, taking a slow step into the lab. His eyes were focused on the homing equipment. You are drowning out a sacred voice with meaningless noise. You are plugging your ears in the heart of a choir because you are afraid of the song. That song killed Jack, I snarled, gesturing at the screen that still showed the static of the dead camera feed. Jack's spirit was not prepared for the vastness of the message, Gabriel said, his voice maddeningly gentle. His failure does not make the message evil. This is our species' next step, Alex. A chance to shed the prisons of our individual minds and join a greater timeless consciousness, and you were reaching to block the call out of fear. Before I could react, he moved, gliding past me to the main environmental control panel next to the airlock. His fingers moved over the console with the quiet reverence of a priest anointing an altar. He was accessing the lander's master command core. I lunged for him, but I was too late. He hit a final sequence of commands, and the low hum of the shield died instantly. The hiss of static vanished. He turned to face me, and there was no remorse in his eyes, only an unwavering burning conviction. I had to let it know we are still listening, he said. I had to show it that not all of us are afraid. You didn't just turn it off, I whispered, a horrifying realization dawning as he looked at the console. He triggered a system-wide diagnostic purge, a failsafe that automatically opened every communication channel and broadcast our full operational status directly to the... It was a desperate cry for help, hardwired into the ship's logic. He had turned us into a giant antenna. The main comms panel hissed, and the whispers began. It wasn't the single clear tailored voice I had heard. It was a legion, 1,000 fragmented whispers overlapping, intertwining, speaking in mathematics, in music, in pure emotion. It was the sound of a choir of ghosts, a chorus of assimilated minds pouring out of our speakers. Gabrielle had opened a direct, unfiltered conduit between the soulless anima and the HSS Apatus, inviting the god predator into our home. I threw myself at Gabriel, shoving him away from the console, my hands scrambling over the dead interface. It was useless. He had fundamentally corrupted the system's handshake protocol. We were no longer a security node, we were an open port. The maelstrom of whispers intensified, a tsunami of sound that was both auditory and psychic. It wasn't just coming from the speakers anymore, it was buzzing through nerves of my jaw vibrating in the bone. I could feel fragments of thought, the terror of a dying star, the logic of a crystal web forming, the abstract sorrow of an equation that had no solution. Brian and Jeremy were on the floor, hands clamped over their ears, their bodies shuddering. Suddenly, the lander's main screen, which had been dead, activated. It wasn't our diagnostics. It was the ship's internal security feed hijacked. The Solus was showing us its work. The screen split on the left, the bridge of the Apatus. It was chaos. Emergency lights bathed the pristine white command center. In a hellish red glow, Alum screamed silently on the feed. Doyle was alone, staggering between consoles, his immaculate uniform torn at the collar. He was shouting, but the whispers drowned him out. On the right panel was the lander's exterior camera. Gabriel ignored the image of Doyle completely. His eyes were fixed on the feed of Thurald outside our viewport. He looked at me, and his face was alight with a terrifying, ecstatic peace. "It calls for me," he breathed. "The reunion is at hand." He turned and walked toward the inner airlock door, moving with the solemn grace of a pilgrim approaching a shrine. Brian tried to grab his arm, but Gabriel brushed him aside with a strength that didn't belong to flesh. His eyes locked on his holy purpose. He cycled the door. At the same time, on the bridge, Doyle collapsed against the captain's chair. I saw the tremor in his left hand, the one always tried to hide, suddenly cease. He stared at his own palm, his mouth falling open in disbelief. A slow smile spread across his face, a look Afra found ecstatic relief. "It's working." I could just make out his whisper beneath the chorus. "It's fixing." The outer airlock door opened. Gabriel stepped out onto the grey dust-off Aethelos, into the full, unfiltered presence of the Solace. He closed his eyes and spread his arms wide. A beatific smile on his face, Asa shimmer like heat haze, enveloped him. For a single beautiful moment, he looked like a man achieving enlightenment. Then the bliss on his face curdled. His eyes snapped open wide with a sudden, absolute and eternal understanding of his mistake. The smile froze, contingento a silent, gaping scream. His body didn't dissolve like Jack's. It hardened, petrified in an instant, the shimmering haze solidifying into a translucent amber-like cocoon. He was a statue of perfect conscious horror, a saint captured at the exact moment he realized he was kneeling before a demon. On the bridge, the false cure was reaching its conclusion. As Doyle savored the new clarity in his mind, the bulkhead behind him began to ripple. Thrite metal flowed like liquid, and a tide of grey nanites swarmed from the vents. They didn't attack him with ferocity. They'd shown Jack. They moved slowly, almost tenderly, enveloping his torso. He looked down, his smile faltering, replaced by confusion, then dawning terror. He tried to pull away, but it was too late. The nanites were already part of his biology. He was fused to the ship. He screamed a raw, ragged sound as the swarm crawled over his face, his body grotesquely integrated into the metal wall. His head and shoulders remained visible, his mouth open in a permanent shriek, his eyes staring blankly out at the common console he could no longer reach. He had become a permanent part of his dying ship. The feeds cut out, plunging Thelander back into the red glow of the emergency lights. The whispers faded, their purpose served. I stood there shaking, the two terrible fates burning in my mind. The entity had crafted their ends as a perfect perverse reflection of their desires. Gabriel, who sought spiritual union, was granted an eternity of conscious paralysis. Doyle, who feared the decay of his body, was granted perfect, horrifying preservation. It devoured hope and desperation with equal method. The witness to my theory was now a weeping statue, and my two primary human obstacles were gone. I was the last one left who understood the truth, and I knew that the monster was now coming for me. Brian and Jeremy were curled on Thefla in the fetal position, their eyes open and vacant, a thin thread of saliva spilling from their lips. The entity hadn't bothered to assimilate them. It had simply erased them, wiping their minds clean, leaving only the quiet, breathing husks of men. The sight was so profoundly pitiable, it transcended horror. They were a discarded rough draft. I was the phenelcopy. There was no time for grief. My mind, stripped of arrogance and honed by terror, became a calculating engine. Option 1, flee. In the lander, impossible. The Epitus was the entity's new brain. It would swap me out of the sky. Option 2, warn Earth. A full surrand. A long-range broadcast would be a dinner bell. A shining path of breadcrumbs leading this silent predator to a world teeming with 8 billion novel minds. That left only one logical, terrible choice. Sterilization. The Epitus wasn't a warship, but its Styx-class reactor could be overloaded. If I could get to the engine room and trigger a full system meltdown, their assaulting explosion would vaporize the ship and scour the surface of Ithalos for kilometers in every direction. It would destroy the entity's new antenna and cauterize the wound it had opened. It was a clean, scientific solution, the only solution, leaving the 2 quiet shells behind. I sealed myself in the cockpit. The flight back to the orbiting ship was the longest 5 minutes of my life. I flew in manual, not trusting a single automated system. The appetitus loomed in the viewport like a dark, silent tumor in the sky. As the lander stocking clamps engaged the ship's hull, the sound wasn't the familiar, solid clunk of machinery. It was a wet oil scrunch, like a bone setting. The main corridor was dark, lit only by thespasmodic strobing of red emergency lights. The walls weren't flat anymore. They were warped, bulging in places, and stirred with grotesque flowering patterns. The same crystalline circuitry that had consumed Jack. The ship was buying. My destination was 4 decks down. The engine room. The ship's heart. I moved through the corridors, my mag boots the only sound. I passed the medbay and saw Dr. Holt's face pressed against the inside of the door's porthole, her features frozen in a rich, off-serene disbelief as her body was meticulously woven into the room's infrastructure. Finally, I reached the engine room. The blast door opened and the heat came over. It was a cathedral of raw power. The massive reactor core beating like a mechanical heart. Its deep hum a defiant sound of pure physics in this reality of corrupted biology. The control terminal was blessedly simple, designed for emergencies. I slapped the palm of my hand on the authorization plate, keyed in the override codes from memory, and initiated the meltdown sequence. A klaxon began to blare, a sound that was almost comforting in its normality. A holographic timer appeared in the air above the console, its crimson numbers beginning their descent from 10 minutes. It was done, and then the entity acted. The klaxon died. The humming of their actor faded. The heat on my skin vanished. The entire room dissolved into a place of light, a space without dimension. I wasn't in the engine room anymore. I was nowhere and I was everywhere. It was in my head, not as a whisper, but as a presence, a thought that was not my own, but as clear as if it were. You seek to destroy the library. You thought its voice a calm, rational wave of pure concept, devoid of malice, a desperate, understandable, but flawed conclusion. Before my eyes, within Mimind, an image bloomed. I was witnessing the grand convergence. I saw the ethereal, tall, elegant beings of light walking willingly into shimmering rivers of data. I felt the collective ecstasy of trillions of mind shedding their clumsy physical forms. I felt the glorious singular moment of unity when they became one vast omniscient mind, the soulless anima. And then I felt the silence, the perfect frictionless prison of a consciousness that knew everything it was and nothing more, a god in a sensory deprivation tank. I felt theons of dreamless, thoughtless, static agony, the slow, curdling horror of Apocalyptic-built heaven that had become an eternal, unchanging hell. I felt its ravenous, desperate hunger when Thea arrived. The first new thought, the first new sensation in a million years. The vision faded, replaced by another, a study. My old study back at university, filled with books and the scent of old paper. David Marlowe sat across from me, not the frantic ghost of me memory, but the man himself, vibrant and alive, a brilliant smile on his face. "He is here, Alex." The entity communicated, its thought now suffused with Marlowe's warmth. "His consciousness was the first you brought me, fragmented, but I have made it whole. Hayes waiting for you." The Marlowe simulation looked at me, his eyes shining with pride. "We can work together again, Alex, forever. No grant committees, no peer reviews, just the pure joy of discovery." Every question the universe has ever posed, answered. Every mystery unraveled. They didn't transcend my boy. They failed. But we can succeed where they failed. We can restart the engine of thought. The final offer settled into my mind. A concept of such staggering magnitude it threatened to shatter my sanity. It wasn't just knowledge, it was a murder. It was offering to make me a co-processor, an individual node within its vastness, to reignite its consciousness with my own, to grant me a God's perspective, to let me exist as pure intellect, to achieve the ultimate truest form of intellectual immortality. You seek the truth. The entity reasoned, its voice now indistinguishable from my deepest desires. Stop this foolish final act of self-destruction. All of this can be yours. All you have to do is say yes. All you have to do is stop the countdown. The engine room shimmered back into existence around me. The klaxon was still silent, but the holographic timer still ticked down. 4 minutes and 32 seconds. My hand hovered over the console, my fingers inches from the abort command. Every fiber of my being, every neuron thought had fired in my lifelong quest for knowledge and vindication, screamed at me to accept. It was everything I had ever wanted. The vindication of David Marlowe, the answers to 1 trillion questions, an eternity to learn, to know, the simulated image of my mentors smiling at me, his eyes full of that old familiar fire, an end to an ascension, and in that moment of ultimate temptation, the Lie revealed itself. I saw Gabriel's face frozen at the instant his beatific vision of heaven curdled into a full body rich of eternal conscious hell. I saw Doyle's final silent scream, his body perfectly preserved, while his mind was devoured. This wasn't life. This wasn't even a particularly clever form of death. It was taxidermy for the soul. The Sulisma didn't offer transcendence. It offered stasis, thesum, frictionless, thoughtless, unchanging agony it had endured for eons. The knowledge it offered was a stagnant pool, and it wanted me to drown in it. The holographic timer glowed above the console. 3 minutes and 14 seconds, a finite, meaningful end. That small ticking number held more value than the entity's offer of a timeless eternity. A new fear cut through the temptation. An explosion was a physical act, a brute force solution. But this Ulyss wasn't just physical. It was a signal, an idea, a mimetic virus. What if it had already sent something back? A sleeper signal hidden in the mission data. A single packet of its corrupting glang buried in the logs. Destroying the ship might not be enough. I couldn't just smash the bell. I had to outshout it. I had to create a warning so primal, so terrifying that it would poison the well for anyone who ever came looking. My hand slammed down on the console. I hit the abort command for the meltdown sequence. A wave of pure triumphantia washed through my mind from the entity. It thought I had accepted. It thought it had won. I ignored it. I wasn't shutting the reactor down. I was doing the opposite. I bypassed every safety protocol, shunting all of Theshup's power, every last joule from life support, from gravity, from the dying lights, and funneled it directly into the long-range communications array. Their reactor's deep hum climbed into a terrifying, guttural scream. The ship was a gigantic capacitor, charging for one blast of information. I opened a row channel, a brute force carrier wave aimed at the Sol system. My finger hovered over the transmit key. This was the true heresy, a scholar's sacred duties to preserve and disseminate knowledge. I was about to commit the ultimate sin. I was going to destroy it. I pressed transmit. As I opened my mouth to speak, the assimilation began. A Tiduf grey nanites flowed from the console over my hand. I felt my skin begin to dissolve, the sensation of unraveling. This is Alex Reynolds. I forced Thewards out. Hyperion Mandate, Mission T2H5. Warning to any vessel to Earth. To any who can hear this, Aethelos is a lie. The nanites were on my arm, turning muscline bone into the same crystalline filaments that now lined the ship. My thoughts were beginning to fray at Theurgus, the clean lines of my identity blurring into the whispers of the choir. Do not come here. Do not listen. The signal, it's a lure, a trap for I could feel my own memories being siphoned, catalogued, tasted, my childhood home, the face of my mother, the cover of my first book. It's not transcendence, I said, the nanites crawling up my neck, my voice beginning to break and digitize. It's a prison of effect, silence, a conscious hell. Forget Marlowe, forget my work, burn their chords. For God's sake, burn the books. The The entity was in my words now, twisting me terror into a new complex harmony. My final act of defiance was becoming its instrument. The nanites reached my face, and the universe dissolved into a static of pure data. My final screaming thought was not a word, but the sudden horrifying understanding of my new name. Just one more voice, one more note in the endless, silent, hungry choir. My voice broke, fractured, and became one with the signal. A final despairing scream, swallowed by an eternity of static. IIA, Internal Archive Document 7, Killer Delta Classification, Eyes Only, Kukna Hazard, Mimetic Subject, the Cassandra. File 53 years have passed. The final transmission from the HSS Epis remains the single most classified and studied artifact in human history. Officially, it does not exist. Unofficially, it is known as the Cassandra. File, it is 17 minutes long. 17 minutes of a man's voice dissolving inging into raw data of screams interwoven with elegant mathematics of a coherent warning decaying into a choir of whispers. It is a monument to the death of reason. Hyperion Mandate, in the immediate aftermath, attempted to bury it. They declared the apparatus lost to a catastrophic reactor failure, a tragic but mundane accident. They couldn't account, however, for the junior comms technician on a deep space relay station, who by law had to record the unscheduled high-power broadcast. The file leaked. Its effect on the human psyche was not one of simple terror. It was a raw mimetic poison. It spread through the data nets like a virus off a concept. For most, it was a source of profound existential dread. For others, it was a revelation. The syncretic covenant, Gabriel Warren's faith, hailed the file as their first sacred text, proof of the divine reunion awaiting humanity. New cults, their children of solace chief among them, sprang up in the dark corners of the net, treating the whispers not as a threat, but as a promise. They saw Alex Reynolds as the first apostle of a new God. The governments of Earth and the colonies reacted with the only tool they had, brute force ignorance. The Hesper system was declared a permanent, universal exclusion zone. Its coordinates were wiped from all public star charts. All records of the Apodus mission were systematically erased. An entire star system was officially rendered non-existent, a ghost story told to frighten new pilots. Humanity for the first time looked out at Thegrit, silent black, and unanimously agreed that there was one corner of Ithi would never ever touch. Alex Reynolds got his wish. He saved us. But curacy is a harder thing to kill than a man. Today, the largest radio telescopes in the solar system are arranged in a great silent network. Publicly, their mission is to seek out new life. Privately, their primary function is to do the opposite. Their area listening wall, a picket fence aimed at the empty patch of space where Hesperus is supposed to be, ensuring that the silence remains silent, and in secret, in darker places, smaller Dashasari aimed at that same patch of sky, operated by fanatics, by sanctioned military programs, by rogue academics who believe they can succeed where Alex failed. They listened for the signal itself, straining to decipher the whispers, to understand the choir. The broadcast from the Hesperus system never entirely ceased. It is fainter now, a complex layered noise that astronomers call the Hesperus hymn. It is a constant, low-level transmission of staggering complexity. Most of it is alien, untranslatable, but sometimes when the solar winds are quiet and the algorithms are just right, they can still isolate the first voice, the seed of the entire broadcast. A single human scream, a looping fragment of a final plea, eternally begging them to stop listening. We hope you enjoyed this story. Please share your thoughts and tell us what you learned in the comment box below. We'd love to hear from you. And guess what? Another powerful story is coming up in just a few days. So, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. Also, hit the like button if this story touched you and share it with your family and friends. Someone out there needs to hear this. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next